Commissioner Gordon.
Hey, Emily, I can't find, I don't know if you want to be on the email chain, but like your email isn't on your paradigm if you do. I don't know if you're here.
Okay, folks, who's AF in this debate?
Green Valley.
Green Valley?
Yeah.
Okay. New start time is 3 p.m. That'll be updated on Tab Room, and you should receive a blast saying so.
Hey, Emily, are you here?
Nick or Nate?
You guys, I'm gonna send this out, and then my debate is.
All right. Is everyone here?
I'm here.
All right, sweet.
The Green Valley's half, right?
Yeah.
Looks like. Yeah, cool.
All right. I think I see 2 judges, so I think we're waiting on Emily.
I'm not sure she's here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think Emily's here now. Making scrambled eggs. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and send it out. It just got sent. All right, is anyone not ready? Good. Nick, you good? Okay. Sweet. Plan the United States federal government to substantially reduce foreign military sales of arms by substantially reducing its United States Africa Command military training missions of African militaries. Contention 1 is stability. Scenario 1 is Somalia. U.S. military presence in Africa is almost entirely centered around training operations. That's Myron 13. My missions are carried out below the radar. Almost all the missions of African Americans are there advised assistance train African militaries and take part in the combat. Many African countries looking to use our interest high-profile U.S. presence to focus on operations developing indigenous capacity, and U.S. interference results in massive instability. Removing presence is key to sustainable peace. Empirics prove that Sazakawa in 828 Washington has been added by maintaining control over the Horn of Africa, manifesting repeating intervention. The Somali invasion has huge sectors of countries rose over rebellion against the U.S., leading to deaths of thousands of Somalia. After decades of military involvement, the situation remains unstable. Somalia's only hope for sustainable peace lies within the national unity absent the U.S., and that escalates Somalia into a generational conflict. That's Christian. And then 19, Trump has quietly escalated the fight in Somalia. This is a foreign policy failure in progress. Intervention Somalia should be shut down before it spirals into generational conflict. This war is now escalating. Do we want to do the Somalia's government job for it? That is exacerbate political stability by contributing to security of American people or Somali people. And Somalia has become the most violent country in the world in recent years due to political instability. That's a sign 10 to no country has been more impoverished than Somalia. Economic climate change, 2 decades of conflict, the state collapse, and which transnational governments of the government established in 2012, a roadmap towards a stabilization reality has been quite different. Somalia experienced the most incidents of armed organized violence against civilians in the world. Somalia has become Africa's most violent state. 150 unique armed states activated in Somalia. This increase is due to proliferation of militia. Somalia's authorities are focusing on political stabilization, rebuilding state institutions, improving economic resilience, and reducing poverty. And while recent data is unavailable, at least 4,500 civilians were killed in 2016 alone. That's Vowed News in 17. More than 4,500 civilians have been killed in Somalia for 2017. Al-Shabaab is responsible for more than 60%, claim Mitchell's 30%. And the state actors, including the army and police, 11%, 12% undetermined. Only local responses solved. Somalia can overtake their own training effectively. AFRICOM training programs are failing. Both domestic and foreign experts agree. That's Ahmed and 18. Somalia's by position take responsibility of the country. Small force not capable and ready. Handle from Amazon lack of coordination. Trainer countries lead to poor results. International actions spent decades trying to build an effective national force with low success here. Edges are required and long few external providers. Macro level training soldiers receive, which undermines efforts of building a unified force. Scenario 2 is the Sahel. AFRICOM has been ramping up training measures in Africa's Sahel region, ignoring the way those militaries abuse their power to sustain authoritarian regimes and instability. That's February 19. U.S. AFRICOM is gearing up their largest exercise taking place in Burkina Faso, country plagued by deterring their security and human rights violation committed by U.S. ally force. Their attacks on all the rise in security. Forces have been accused for extrajudicial killings. This week, the Chadian military captured 250 rebels. An example of Western countries helps extinguish rebel groups who pose a threat to authoritarian regimes. The U.S. are supporting dictators who seize in power order to maintain a semblance of stability. The U.S. military plans to partner with the African Sahel for their long haul use initiatives and linking the U.S. units with allied militaries for continual training. And instability and political violence in the Sahel causes thousands of civilian deaths and millions are displaced each year. The problem is getting worse. Countries are paying us for security assistance instead of providing social services for their population. The Spain at 627. But violence in the Sahel has never spread so fast. The UN said that warning of unprecedented crisis. The number of people uprooted Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger has increased fivefold in the last year. More than 1,200 civilians have been killed in the last year through May. 4.2 million people are displaced. 5 billion inside of the state funds from services like healthcare and education funding very rarely transferred from social spending, security spending, and aggravate the issues. Civilians cannot tell the difference between military vehicles, cars bringing food aid. The workers having increasingly become the target. And best data shows a 300 to 7,000% increase in civilian fatalities in the Sahel from last year. That's ECLED in 19. ECLED has recorded a massive spike in deadly violence across the Sahel. Conflict in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso is a major driver of the escalation. Civilians have faced the violence fatalities targeting civilians since 2019. Average in 7,028%. Burkina Faso 500%, Niger 300%. In Mali, violence shows few signs of stopping. ECLED is the highest quality, most widely used real-time data analysis source on political violence around the world. And climate change makes these conflicts uniquely volatile and increases escalation. That's essential. And 9, previous level international cooperation will continue to prevent even formal games. Might include states coming to the blows. Policy plan is attempting to gauge the danger. Resource escalates to war, contribute to 37 violent incident and extensive an extensive statistical study determined that accounting for factors related to interstate conflict, the countries face a high probability of engaging in fatal military disputes, growing water demands, and greater scarcity, hiding the risk of planes will become militarized. The conflict cooperation often coexists nominally collaborative acts and faster and exacerbate contentious underlying issues. Internal wars have killed 3 times more people than interstate conflict. Are also far more common and can be destabilizing global orders. International ones for study determined that likelihood that countries would fall into civil war increased by more than a half, and that AF solves, even if it's not the silver bullet for stability. Robust data shows that AFRICOM training has a substantial negative effect on the factor underlying stability and violence through Africa. That's Felstein and 18. The Congressional Research Service notes that in large military preventing local backlash against government Western countries, foreign buildup can strengthen the authoritarian regimes responsible for a serious violation of human rights. Look at the U.S. and partners is telling scholars that the U.S. military engagement partner forces forms creating long-term stability, increase the probability of military coup using data from 189 countries over a 39-year period. Found training alters balance power between military, civilian authority, increase the likelihood that security service will attempt to violate other service. So why U.S. administration continue to invest in expanding Africa? Campbell describes the phenomenon of securitization of U.S. foreign policy. The temptation to turn to military whenever crisis proves irresistible to policymaker. Trump shows little awareness of trade-offs between authorizing increased involvement and more vigorous civilian strategy. Based on data, policymakers need to ask a question about whether this year's threat justifies continuing U.S. military role in Africa. Past history suggests that the U.S. military is not the best institution to address continuing conflict and instability on the continent. Contention, too, is our heuristic. Our interpretation is that the 1AC should be evaluated as an isolated artifact. The negative can only weigh off into the 1AC specific epistemology and action, not external structures or representation. Debate over international policy is necessary to solve global crisis and provides an essential counterweight to government propaganda that enables reckless foreign policy. That's Walton 11. There's no shortage of popular problem, social science to study in depth, conflict, economic development, terrorism, management of fragile world economy, climate change, and environmental degradation, great power robbery, spread of WMT, and independent academic communities, essential counterweight to official effort to shape public understanding foreign policy, given the information asymmetries, obvious interest retaining the public towards hardly surprising leaders, access to info, to both explore specific policies, telling outright alternative voices are needed to challenge the conventional wisdoms and suggest different solutions are uniquely positioned to challenge the prevailing narratives of policy, no rationales, and bring knowledge and training to debate about vital policy issues. Debate has exposes errors and correct steps for fostering more effective policies. Engaging scholar community is essential to help healthy polity. It is highly desirable for scholars to play a significant role in the public discourse where key world issues. Academic research can help also make the sense of trends and create the test theories. So leaders can use to choose among policy instruments. Academic theories on how policymakers anticipate event facilitate formulation of policy alternatives. Academic scholars are in an ideal position to develop new concepts and theories to help understand complex changing of the world. And policy training is critical to producing effective foreign policy. Scholars focus on theory and generalization ensures it will be dismissed. That's Walton 11. The gap between ivory tower policy rise because academics focus on developing generalization. Policymakers probably are preoccupied with individual cases. Scholars are delighted whenever they identify a powerful general tendency, but policymakers may be more interested in figuring out how to overcome the general tendency or worried that the case might be an exception. Policymakers often find academic scholars value in the scholars' voice. Methodological sophistication allows us alone tells us that relatively little about value and political works. While privileging methodological sophistication, widening the gap between ivory tower policy and the public sphere to advance this goal give greater weight to policy relevance. We could encourage students to home real world policy debates and identify the dispute that drive policy disagreements and determine the truth of our AF on a sliding scale. Our specific conflict analysis is good and necessary. Macro level depictions fail that context. Incomplete or imperfect epistemology is not a reason to vote negative. Imperfect but specific analysis is better than none at all. That's Berena. And 3. Conflict analysis is studying the causes and dynamic conflict. It's key to establish a linkage between the identifying and spiritual dynamics at national level may be different from those of the grassroots. Looking at each element with the help to develop a picture of the context. Good enough thinking is required. Analysis can never be exhaustive nor provide abusive absolute certainty. Conflict dynamics, such complex and volatile for any analysis. Analysis, nevertheless, such finding analysis, no matter how imperfect, is better than no analysis at all. And specificity trumps generalities. Robust studies prove looking at specific contextual factors is necessary to diagnose and predict the conflicts. Overarching theories fail, and our predictions and solutions are better. That's Williams. And 12. The attention to armed conflict receives highly engagement of scientific communities growing. A micro-level centered approach to armed conflict includes attention to detail, advanced incorporation, just quantitative analysis, considering contextual information without which causal explanation can be misconstructing and center data. After giving advanced the ability for policy communities to react to the conflict and create early warning system, this approach yields important advances. First, it becomes clear that no two events are the same. Second, different types of events that make up the conflict preserve variability are increased in consideration of all possible mechanisms. Such events that there are more than one mechanism may be at work, and that specific events make up the armed conflict vary with each mechanism. A single measure of that summation is inappropriate. Our related events, setting, and outcome specific reasoning are required to arrive at reasonable predictions for consequences of armed conflict. The micro-level events that are approaching opportunity for tremendous advances, and cultural cultural change in the verifier or truth claims, that's Fluck and 10, times, gravity, bacteria, and so on, are real and exist independently of discourse. The only explanation for success of science is theories refer to these real entities which exist independently of human experiences. These procedures are oriented towards reality. Post-positivist reply in social sciences, the knowers of the object realist, and it does not follow structure completion or creation of social science. They are simply constructed through ideas. Since we are born into a world of structure which precedes us, we extend described independent existence to social structure on the basis of their pre-existence. We can recognize that they are real on the basis of the causal power. They have a constraining effect on our activity. Mark the card activity. All right, I'm good.
Good?
Yeah.
Okay. So your cards talk about supporting authoritarian regimes and the effects that has in terms of domestic politics in Africa. I'm wondering what the metric is for what defines an authoritarian regime.
Okay, irregardless of whether or not we have made a claim that like authoritarian regimes are a huge cause of that. It's just the idea that there's a significant amount of violence, and data connects between AFRICOM and that violence. So it doesn't matter what our interpretation of an authoritarian regime is. If we prove
Well, it does sort of matter because your evidence describes that that we're supporting all of these bad authoritarian regimes, and that may be true. I'm just trying to determine how we know which regimes are authoritarian and which ones are not.
The 1AC doesn't take a stance on what quantifies as an authoritarian regime or not, because it's not relevant to the 1AC nor the solvency of the 1AC. Because we have isolated 2 specific regions. We're not saying that we're going to solve authoritarianism writ large globally, which means that it doesn't matter if we haven't given you the definition of what the authoritarian regime is.
I'm not link fishing. I'm just trying to figure out like what the AF does. But I guess we'll talk about
that if you want.
Let's do like more definitions. What's the threshold for instability? Is the United States unstable right now?
We don't take a stance on whether or not the U.S. is unstable. We have read data that says that Somalia is unstable right now. There are deaths happening, a litany of deaths.
What does it mean? Okay, how about this? What does it mean for Somalia to be unstable?
Right, so our evidence does outline multiple things. The Vow News evidence says that 4,500 civilians have been killed because of the conflict that arises from instability. It also lists things
I mean, I'm sure like literally 10 times as many people have been killed in the United States today. So like obviously that's not the only metric, right?
That will be a link of omission. Yes, we're not going to resolve like things in the US because the topic is about selling arms sales to another country. But all the arguments that you might be like fetching for right now, Nick, is that it wouldn't matter at all in the future because we've
okay, all right, back to the original question. Instability. Okay, the first metric is civilian casualties. What's the next thing? You said there were a couple things.
Civilian casualties.
Okay.
They also say that we remove social services. Instead, the people locally are focusing on security spending, which means that in comparison, there's like no healthcare, et cetera. They have a lack of like housing, water supply, things like that.
Should we is there so you've said there's an ethical obligation to sort of like, intervene, not intervention, but like,
we have not made an ethical obligation claim. We have made a claim as is. There is instability and violence happening in Somalia and in the Sahel. People are dying. We have data that links that instability to AFRICOM, which means that nothing broader than just data says AFRICOM is bad. Thus, we should just try to remove AFRICOM because that is a good option to resolve instability in the region.
There's your 2 AR. Do we need prep money? Okay.
I sent the 1AC. It's one off. Okay, I'm gonna switch over to Ethernet. So everyone got it? Anyone not ready?
We're good.
Okay.
Wait, Bunny. What's the order? Is it just the K and then case or just the K?
There's no case.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. We have reached the end of geopolitics. Robots and technology have changed the scope of human subjectivity and our ability to conceptualize state behavior. The realist paradigm is dead, inaugurating a techno-political empire in which power becomes naturalized in the objects around us. Technology is combined to secure the international world order within a broader paradigm of technological reason that seeks the complete synchronicity of all matter. This new computational approach to politics has transformed Africa into a phantasmic playground of the necropolitical West, a region geopolitically deprived of being that serves as a terrain for the experimentation and production of subjectivity for modern coloniality. It lays the foundation for all modern destruction. Work 16. There was the fantasy shared by the left and the right that the states underdeveloped world would come come to approximate the developed world, this I believe belongs to a world of signification that has its unity, identity, thought, and act. I've been attempted to the reverse direction that I think post-colonial states is coming to resemble the ones they've colonized, neither discourse of African liberation and national self-determination nor the neoliberal successor have replaced that colonial imaginally present presence can have a quite integral relation with each other. Africa that appeared in the colonial imaginary is multilateral and for human is a place world. Historical experience are not African, the condition by which life is incapable of developing its culture and their present existence is the same as always been. Makes Africa the location of this imaginary place not to the self-creation of the very colonizing some people claims that an act we colonize people of a heart with a being species. Africa is the mediation that enables the West to see its own self-conscious to give a public account of being subject to Africa's weirdest things are Africa lacks rather than being taken unused social theory thanks to first industrialization in Europe as a default model the link between modernity rationalism and the West appears some more than contingent made a spatial type world scheme of modernity would distinguish our from the previous age is contingent powerless existent is citizens is contingent power reveals itself in the guise of arbitrariness and the absolute power gave to get death at any time accomplishing its own work through the sovereignty thereby for its hard to be exercised as a right to kill and oppress Africa with death. The colonizer cannot recognize himself or herself in the eyes of the colonized, for the colonizer remains a thing colonial discourse is an aberrant product of the madness of threatens all domination. The affirmative indoctrinates a new Malthusian anticipatory regime for Africa or Mara, wherein a preemption logic is extended into climate and health. We will witness Africa's development into a new mobile command center for the Pentagon and the blurring of humanitarian and military missions that lays the foundation for global expansionism under humanitarian ends. Hartman 14. Mara creates a bridge between post-9/11 politics and terrorist speculative preemption of the greater threat, the greater risk of an action, even if certainty remains preemption has now moved beyond terrorism to health and environmental threats, disease and climate change. Mara himself are going to leave the idea to try to focus preemptive security. Africa is a vulnerable region for excellence and again is exercising authority over development and sustainability. Intelligence calls for the development of systematic strategy for wanting to threats to climate change and want to move away from the reinforced humanitarian agenda. Good intentions only go so far when the global remains of U.S. dominance and the global countries locked in a perpetual state of war defining climate change as a security threat as well. Shift in the defense seeking associated stability operations. This preemptive logic is premised on an aesthetic relationship to the world or a means of mediating and making coherent our surroundings. Such an aesthetic of certainty, stability, and denial of flux is foundational for a cybernetic order that functions through the elimination of otherness towards complete interconnectivity. Bleaker 1. War famines and summits are shown to us as short-lived media events that blend information and entertainment the numbing regularity raises their highly arbitrary nature. We become so accustomed to these distorting metaphors that we take them for real to begin lighthearted. Students of IR adhere to representational and habits that have become problematic. The facts of the world emerge with relatively little practical knowledge. Violence remains a modus operandi of world politics, but metaphors of representation have dominated scholarships to represent politics as realistically aiming to capture the word politics as it really is. Aesthetic approach assumes that there is always a gap between representation and what is represented. Aesthetic insight recognizes the inevitable difference in the very location of politics represented practices, how comes to constitute political practice, technological reason as a aesthetic form of a political purview, aesthetic turn, and judges a shift away to a more diverse encounter with the political Irish scholarship uphold the notion of a neutral observant separation of object and subject. Realism has made the real and neutral object of desire political reality become a being through representation. Representation is a process through which organized reality aesthetic embark on a direct political encounter that laid the gap between rather constituting this gap as a threat to the knowledge of political stability. The nobility of the world depends on the suspectability of representation, and no social scientist can represent the political event or independently the form. Choosing the distance or knowledge of the world is structured according to the objects we seek. The knowledge of objects was this not as structured is primarily by their existence, but by the nature of our perception. Orthodox approaches conflates what we know with knowledge and suppose that knowledge is being recognized on external approaches. Common sense can neither explain nor emerge and be aware of its values. So established more to make it very difficult to locate valuable insight into the political. Specifically, the affirmative's move to mastery is premised on adaptive design and mode of world ordering that seeks the eradication of extremity and management of precarity through the nomenclature of diplomacy, connectivity, and global stability. This ontopolitics of design inaugurates a new individualized biopolitics that exists outside of history in a computational terrain of absolute mastery that makes escalating cycles of economic interventionism, imperial proxy wars, and self-referential predictive systems inevitable. Duffield 19. Risk aversion and remote management created distancing, loss of familiarity, Duffield uncertain Western publics now present disillusioned spectator diplomatic influence has declined. NGOs like them to sovereignty. It is unlikely that improvement will occur. International action lies floated in the rubble of universal was no optimistic, technologically updated humanitarianism as like completely for cheaper humanitarianism, design, connectivity, innovations of the private partners and corporate sponsorship and necessary recalibration give the seamless penetration of information and communication technology, software platforms, interfaces, all aspects of international life. Humanitarian innovation draws positivity from disavowed past pros commitment to falling forward transparency regarding systematic pathologies, part of the self-cleansing necessary birth of humanitarianism 2.0. Innovation is helping your structure to go over global precarity, institutional privileging a design principle over the computational turn and change the way the world is understood. Ontological, epistemological, and methodological translation has taken place. Direct action was fabricated, adaptive knowledge formation for by narratives of the have been replaced by the data machine thinking is transformed into calculation dominance. Academy of empiricism of reflexive turn without separation. There's no political comments and critique as essential over to share the world with others. We are all now designers to accept the world as it is rather than how it ought to be. This is an example of neoliberalism dissolving and sapping resistant north and south are drawn together around the globe. ideological precarity, the disappearance of good jobs, the debt financing every recovery, people are then the last, the economy becomes a site of permanent emergency, new disaggregated and personalized biopolitics emerges, become the zeitgeist of the late Brazilians, and chronically important disaster effect of modern day rose up to permanent emergency. The role is to govern an emerging global precarity to sustain precarity by optimizing its reproduction. The alternative is an Afro-political and computational aesthetic to create new forms of knowledge premised on the mediation of tech and to care for each other and the active dismantling of structures of connectivity in response to the technological paradigms, radical changes to subjectivity. You should bet on uncertainty, disorder, and the flux of the world, not as a neutral receptor of power, but as imbued with energy and creative potential, reconceptualizing the purpose of knowledge away from mastery or monitoring to social enrichment and new collectivities. Membe 16. Computation entering the ways that concepts are framed the compilation of the mind with the computers, the basis of current knowledge, and a search for determinants of human decision-making. Knowledge is reduced to people's responses to market into the idea they will gain insight into humanity if we apply the laws of physics. The market, if we measure the primary mechanism for the validation of truth, all sciences will be sciences of data. As the boundaries of perception are outstretched, Africans are protected from one temporal region to the other. They were paving the way for Afro-political and aesthetic instability. The plasticity of digital forms speak to the plasticity of African cultures and ways of working with separation and folding reality of the world beyond human perceptibility and knowledge was conceptualized as the unbounded vista. Then the vista was divided up and distributed, have become, or technological devices have become an extension of ourselves. They have institutionalized relationship between humans and other living vital African who drift headlong, anticipated modern and new rejected ways of being. Clear distinction between ourselves and object, establish our relationship to what's around us, a change of result of entanglement with technologies. This convergence is the emergence of an entirely different kind of human being. This technological revolution is taking shape when Africa is perceived as the last frontier of capitalism, minerals, plants, animals, water, sun is a place where the potential for human species still is high. Only a new reading of African violence, which understands the complex project of cybernetic interconnectivity, can move beyond the instinct towards withdrawal and provide long-term solutions. Hartman 14. Environmental strategy will Darfur, the Department of Defense is financing African Stability Project. The Center's project, a digital map of Africa that locates the conflict hotspots where aid should be concentrated. Climate and security stresses to legitimate surveillance by the U.S. intelligence community. Africa is the prime focus for stress testing, threat protection, so the larger aim of building up borders through offensive patrols and definition. There's an anti-politics machine of state policies, power relations, local realities, apocalyptic geopolitics of failed states expanding into global terrorism. Malthusianism has long been an anticipatory virtue in which protection and scarcity of war served to shape public consciousness, gender binary and racial stereotypes are crucial. Ongoing appeal crucial to the way demographic variables can be slotted into the military's war game. We need to speculate about the motives and try to do this powerful act as averting that deception requires disseminating the anti-politics machine discourse by discourse in order to build a politics of peace, justice, and this possibility. I have like 35 seconds. I might have it up too. This is the only way to prevent the endless shift of militarism. Modern God of 12. U.S. secret warfare in Africa, and in addition to the military command, Africa has been distributed deploying principle for all over the continent. Cycles of 40 of 30 ships in the regional military CIA command intelligence operations to secure prison helicopter attacks in U.S. command of U.S. Army headquarters in Italy. America's premier army dedicated to Africa. The whole of Africa is surrounded by army and navy to get other people to do the fighting for them. Oh, that was it. That's funny. Nick will send that one.
Yeah. Okay. You get for 620?
Yeah.
All right, let me.
It's sent, by the way. Yeah. I read green and yellow for the thing Nick sent.
Okay, I heard him in the back.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, no. Okay, you good?
Yeah.
All right, so I kind of want to talk about the 1AC, the alternative. What would a world of the alternative look like?
Okay, but I guess it begins with a grounding or dwelling in the inevitable gap between representation and that which is represented, which is our, and then theory kind of like baseline understanding. But the end of the card talks about how traditions that the alternative would agree with understand the way subjectivity has changed in relationship to technology and how those things are intertwined.
The alternative card says technological devices have become extensions of ourselves. They have instituted a relationship between human and other living or vital things. So is it saying that that relationship between humans and technological developments is bad?
No, it's just our claim, our uniqueness claim, and that it's not bad. It's just like a thing.
Okay, that really did not like really get the boat. So what are you claiming is negative about the way the 1AC is approaching AFRICOM?
We have said that first of all, the 1AC begins with an epistemology that is premised on the attempt to stabilize uncertainty, and that infects the political project both in the presentation, in debate, and in the
how is that not, how is the status? Okay, first I'm gonna ask two questions. First, is the alt a floating pick?
No.
Can it lead to solving the AF or like enacting the AF?
Yeah, it can solve the AF, but it won't do the AF.
Okay, sure. Okay, second is I'm so confused by the description. How is the US's intervention already in the status quo, not already a disruption of that uncertainty?
I'm going to answer.
Yeah.
So that question, the frame of that question is precisely what we are critiquing, which is that understanding of militarism as something that can be reduced through things like pulling back forward deployment, troop deployment, training, AFRICOM, etc., ignores that the New World Order operates not through forward deployment, but precisely because the velvet glove
I have some questions about that. First is so what would be the alternative? Okay, so what happens if we do the plan? Do they enact more policy sales? Like, do they sell more weapons in Africa? We're withdrawal from Africa.
We'll make arguments in the 2 and C about specific scenarios for shift involving like private military contractors and more like flexible forms of empire.
Okay.
I guess that could result. I guess that could be more arms sales.
All right,
but
so then
we have other arguments also.
You've read a card about. Okay, I'm confused on how you can make the claim that we aren't able to resolve anything when you've conceded all the data in the 1AC. You have accepted that this is the characterization of what happens.
I think we might disagree or have some other issues with the data in the 1AC.
That is precisely the thing that we have problematized. Is that somehow there's a connection between the reality of violence and political solutions and like a bunch of data from 2016.
All right, for sure.
Prep. Yeah.
I love Kareem so much. Oh shit, I'm not muted.
– 3 minutes used.
Okay, I sent it. You can flow the framing page on the K, probably. So it's gonna be, oh, okay, no worries. Um,
I'm sorry, did you give an order already?
oh, it's gonna be the like advantage page, and then the framing page, which actually, yeah, framing is at the top of the K or on the body of the K. So
So just the
just
advantage.
yeah, just the advantage and then the critique. Okay. Is anyone not ready?
I think Bernstein still needs a sec.
Oh, okay, no worries.
Can someone else just resend that same document in a different email? My computer's been having this issue where if it tries to open a document that already made it crash, it's going to be unhappy.
Yeah, I got you. What email?
Just send it to the same email. Just send that same document to the chain. If I download it from you, my computer will then probably let it load.
For sure. I am on it. Okay. I resent it. Damn, this shit is 2,000. My bad. That's a big 2AC. Sherry's
fast.
I know, Sherry is fast as shit. Sherry's a beast. She's gonna fuck us up.
I appreciate it, Nick. I appreciate it.
Sorry, I just need a minute more of Judge Tech time.
Yeah, no worries.
I think it's called prep steal time, but
Hands off.
You can do it. I'm very sorry about this.
No worries.
Why is it just not? Here, I have an idea. Let me try pulling up the speech doc and I'll just follow it off of my iPad. And I'll just flow off of there, or I'll flow on my paper still. All right. I'm gonna give up on Word on my computer. You can go ahead.
Okay, anyone else not okay? All right. U.S. training undercuts confidence of African governments and upsets military-civilian balance. That instability leads to generational conflict in Somalia with 150 armed groups and more than 4,500 people killed in 2016 alone. In the Sahel, abuse of power by authoritarian regimes has caused thousands of deaths each year and a 300 to 7,000% increase in civilian deaths. Training is the key, unique internal link that we're able to resolve. That's the Feldman evidence. It conceded our descriptions of the status quo on case. That means that training is the only thing that's causing this instability, not the only thing, but training is the largest factor causing this instability. And we know that removing it is reverse causal, and we're going to be able to resolve their instances of instability. Onto decay. they have conceded our interpretation that the 1AC should be evaluated as an isolated artifact. That means that they can only generate offense from the 1AC's epistemology and the action, not external structures or representations or well, that's key to clash. Anything else shifts the locus point of argument engagement, which undermines the process of debate and eliminates critical thinking and analysis. We're going to problematize their problematization of the 1AC. They've conceded all of the other cards that can be read on the framing advantage. Data is good and should be preferred. Our concession of the Morena evidence means that you err off on this question. They are taking random assertions without context to indict our epistemology, but nothing in there is specific to AFRICOM's training in Sahel or in Somalia. That means that they don't have a way to understand, prevent conflict in our specific scenarios, but only we do. That impact turns their K because they have no truth claim, but only we have predictive evidence that makes it possible to conclude any sort of causality. We're also going to extend the Williams evidence. We're using the most rigorous research possible to test correlations because truth is a sliding scale. You should still vote out on the question of precision of evidence. That means that it's key to effective policy to solve conflict. That turns the truth claim with a K in two ways. The first is that no two events are the same. Even all the examples that they list in their cards aren't about the affirmative. You should reject their generalizations because they are more inaccurate about what violence is happening in the status quo. That means that the alt has a lower probability of solvency than the affirmative does. And there's different explanations of power for different types of violence. Only precise research can have any explanatory power. That means that they don't get to access a root cause argument or this claim that somehow the alt can resolve the app because they don't resolve it through our specific internal link chains. I'm also going to extend, IR is good, information asymmetry is disadvantage. There's a lack of public knowledge over IR that leads to detachment that enables cycles of violence that they criticize, and that makes that the K is inaccessible to policymakers right now, which makes it irrelevant. But the 1AC is able to trace back military policy while still being pragmatic. That means that it prevents activist burnout and generates movements. Even if overlap between the military and debate and military is ridiculous and interdisciplinarity, criticability to the academy and based resistance on the need to hold the state accountable. Rest 15. Military is not good at possibility engagement with the institution. A critical ability to permit the possibility of change with the institutions. Making critics are not just from the scholarly communities. Critics are complex, find out and new, so they waste simplistic positions, find hard to accommodate studies. Should across the military stability, fatal character, and the political version, opportunity strive for progressive change, social sciences, engagement, and permission to do both. That solves the K. They're all essence that impacts happen because the U.S. treats Africa as a frontier of capitalism. We reverse that. That's spelled C. And any AFRICOM is prerequisite demilitarization. Freeman 18. Africa puts African nation as effective military control. If U.S. Africa was recolonized in Africa, thousands of 230 African countries and dozens of U.S. Africa policy politics is putting instruments into African independence and use if China increases their influence on Africa. Africans see advantage of having alternative for Washington. They have every right to militarize Africa, secure access to corporation, robbing Africa of resources, and rich military craftsmanship does little benefit. The people of Africa should set Africa as part of a parcel of the peace movement to demilitarize the world. This is a requirement to any legitimate and genuine peace movement. And the also linked to the K because we don't send any more troops, which is the primary way in which the U.S. government controls the African countries and permutation to the alt. And we link to the work evidence. We're not colonialists, but AFRICOM is. We were restricting a colonialist institution that controls African militaries. That's key to disrupt ontological practice of colonialism. It improves the desirability of the perfect because state action is key to end U.S. military industrial strategy. And the AFSOL restricts neocolonialist institutions. Right 13. African colonies in no way affects the security of the African people given to free flow outreach out of Africa. Africa was out to put American interests from American allies that research the U.S. along with countering the growing Chinese movement on the common resource after the attention of political business leader both in region and international use local military terror groups have made millions of committed actual right under the nose of American military for Africa is a new colonial occupying force with a hard and soft power to use hegemony and guarantee people of the resources of Africa. And Harvard is wrong. They say that we shifted from terrorism to health, but my primary excuse for being there is still counter-terror. We reverse that. That's the Meyer evidence, and the world is getting better. We'll insert 23 charts. Matthews 18. As life on Earth are getting better, how it has fallen past 1990, many of us are aware because humans are strong and divide becomes remains, but the world's getting much better. Extreme poverty has fallen, hunger is falling, child labor is on the decline. Share of income has plummeted, life expectancy is risen, child mortality is down, health child birth is better, people are getting taller, more people have access to malaria beds, good New York has almost eradicated, teen births are down, smoking is down too, homicide rates have fallen dramatically, they're down in the US, violent crimes in the US are going away, probably due to supply of weapons, more people around the world live in democracy, more people are going to school for longer, literacy is more loss isn't quite over yet, access to internet is increasing, solar energy is getting cheaper, and the alt feels there's no way to transition to it, which is it'll lead to less accurate versions of technocracy that are net worse. And utopian beyond political are bad, unfair. So the 1AC moves to best offense, anti-educational sacrifice, clashing in-depth for cheap costs, and the new society, the agent of the alt, making Senator kills TDC strategy, makes them moving a target, also device loading, makes it impossible to be app or way off offense, just by severance as an independent voter. And even if the alt is able to solve some violence of the 1AC, we for sure can do. There's a certainty deficit here, and there's no root cause, particularly each case must be accounted for. Gap 9. Attempts to find the root cause are misplaced and insufficient cause of war. Whole cannot be broken down into pieces. People need desires. We're powerful. Ethically, all modern human nature has a war can be filled out. Particular cause. And their theories, violence makes putting global violence impossible. Norris 90. Conscious may be temporal overnight. Active political circle people engage in local political themselves. Probably and everyone's direct competition with power. The same political conscious may be inversely sheltered. The theory does you value all these help eliminate possible which television may be practically affected. Hyper reality and budgets like how it indicates intellectual but moral that can be redeemed plus monitors should be extended. Granting some information centered to arguments of the truth and ethical critical critique and a person who no longer wants to do battle on public secret without helping millions being killed as a result of policies that are against Bush's betters, both pinocchiots of the world, bad policy, bad politics, nationalism, and the world isn't perfect, but it's getting better. You can look at an analytic. And don't prioritize anything over pragmatic action. They deserve political change. Oh, and so too. Well, if excellent true powers have independent ontological epistemological, it no means clear that it is wholly dependent on these for certain problems, rational choice, we may be find the best available to us by ontology, epistemology, cultivate theory driven rather than problem approach to IR. The turn ontology, epistemology, stimulating the idea that there is only one theoretical approach to indicates the right ambitious cycle arises, and the alt-fields abstract movements will produce political races beside violence. Embrace the hard work of pragmatic reform. Content 15. To act with that vision of an we can call figure historical record, raising case politics, national ties in the violent. We've had a trajectory we have mentioned potential realizable. Alternative people leave the biological producers the work to invent, but alternatives enticing is historical labors, intellectually difficult. If one does not provide a viable vision, the Fox News has a better offering. Also, their alt evidence does not say that it is necessarily mutually exclusive with the affirmative, which means that if there's any risk that the alt isn't able to resolve the affirmative, you should vote affirmative on the perm. Don't we read the?
Just read this. Read it.
Okay. Elimination of countless takes away from the drive of singularity. Sound in competition. Crucible 1. Evolution of the game has led to a skin of the intelligence. I must say that technology will evolve to human level simply because of our destiny. The primary force behind technology and economic imperative will continue to powerful competition, but increasing enormous value. We reverse into the human because of value and interpretation. We provide insights we will have to replicate capitalism and economic competition. Stop this progression and
Just say singularity solves.
And singularity solves all their impacts. I still have a minute.
Read the card.
What? Singularity solves combat, eliminates market systems and class systems, which is at all cost to their impacts, as their evidence indicates. Curran 9. The future has a vision where all humanity will live millions of years, and any time to select a form of defense and tech and robotic global, we're understanding how potential categories extinct that discuss in the future where every house will have a potential manufacturing all single capitalism, silver mineral, and no capitalism, government, cost of capital, almost certain to lose their ability to own the various we require we would all become connection. Marx will not learn how to sing class structures. It's philosophy on. That's good. I don't know what else to say. Okay.
That's good.
Okay, sure.
I sent the cards.
You mind if we pull them up before cross-ex?
Yeah, me too. Whoa.
Hell yes.
All right. Good, Sherry?
Yeah.
Oh, that's 5 minutes. Okay. The framework interpretation, how do we distinguish like epistemology that's directly related or intertwined with the 1AC and like what you say are external structures?
What do you mean? Like, you can attack us in terms of stuff based solely on the 1AC and the evidence that we're defending, but you can't say like things writ large are problematic because we're not defending everything that exists in the status quo.
Okay, so like every one of our cards has to say AFRICOM for it to be offense against the AF?
Sure.
I think
Like that seems like a higher standard than even policy arguments are held to.
Oh,
you know?
Yeah, that's funny to say, but I think that the mischaracterization of it is that you're right. All of your cards say the words Africa, but they are all descriptions of things happening in the status quo, but they are not a criticism of the process of the plan, nor the resolution that the plan
Well,
entails.
that's not what your interpretation is. Your
That
interpretation
is you have to evaluate it as a heuristic, which means you read criticisms to the action of the plan and the mandate of the plan and the effect of the plan. You are reading
I'm pretty sure
criticisms
the
to the
1AC
effect
says
of AFRICOM.
epistemology of the 1AC, but not external structures. Is that wrong? Did I just like misread it?
No, that is our interpretation, but it's like the epistemology of the 1AC, not of the status quo.
Yeah, but epistemology of the 1AC does not equal material implementations of the plan text. So like which one of the...
No, you can generate offense from both epistemology and action. I'm confused.
Okay, got it. But like for some reason, epistemology of the 1AC will never intersect with anything outside of the cards that are there. But okay.
No, it's that your cards have to be about the 1AC's epistemology.
Yeah, you're criticizing AFRICOM and the status quo, and some of it is like even wrong about what AFRICOM's doing in Africa.
And can you give an example of a piece of evidence that would meet the threshold that you've just described? Like what is a card that could exist that could meet that threshold? What would it say?
like a card indicting the removal of AFRICOM.
Okay, cool.
That like the
All right.
theory behind
Epistemology.
that.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah. Okay. You said like data right under the framework debate that we were just talking about. The 2AC was like data is good and you should prefer it. It's better than like random assertions. What's like the warrant for that?
It's because there's no like explanatory power from these like big theories, because data takes into account specific scenarios that makes it possible to understand and prevent future conflicts that are similar.
Okay, so
That
aggregate
was the
data of
Garena
every
evidence.
event in the past provide a good template for future action.
Also, data in the status quo.
Yeah, we say data is good for providing future action.
Wait, for like informing. Okay.
For
so
informing future action. Yeah, we say data is good.
We'll take you up on that debate because I know that's going to be like Nick's 2NC.
yeah, I think we're ahead. Okay, prep, Nick?
We're going to take some prep.
Um, 758.
I have to take a second longer.
Okay, I restarted. Nick. Oh, I'm unmuted. Okay, we stopped again, 723.
Wow, I just realized I was muted. My bad. Is everyone good for an order? Yeah. Okay. It's just the K. There's an overview that's not very long. I'm going to go straight down, but you should leave like a bunch of space for the perm because that's going to be in the one another sheet, depending on how you all do things.
In the bottom of the
So like framework, and then like every data thing extended before, you're gonna go straight down that. Like all the data arguments at the top.
What?
Kareem's asking you a question. He couldn't hear you for some reason, but I heard you, so it's his issue.
Sorry, what's going on?
Sorry, framework, and then straight down all the data stuff that was extended from their heuristic advantage, like straight down that.
Review and then straight down, except I'm going to skip the perm.
Okay.
I hate them for this.
All right, everyone can like hear me and has the document and stuff. I'm going to switch over now, so you got to yell at me if something goes wrong. All right. When he sees the completion of a global project of cybernetic death making, the useless reductions in arm cells and the reestablishment of legitimacy as available for proliferation of global control scheme is marked by space weapons, drone presence, and biometric surveillance as a means of simultaneously eliminating and managing precarity. This is fundamentally an aesthetic paradigm which the 2AC never comes to grips with, which works by redisclosing the world through a technical metaphysics that seeks to exist outside of history in a computational terrain of absolute mastery that seeks the elimination of uncertainty altogether. The affirmative perfects this paradigm in the wake of traditional state-state behavior. Africa has become the new terrain of geopolitical conflicts. The 1AC resituate Africa not just as a security hotspot, but a new domain of instability for things like disease and climate change. The 1AC's obsession with eliminating instability is not a benign singular project like Kareem preemptively insists in Cross-X, but rather a move to certainty, which understands the world as a series of not yet unfolding catastrophes to be resolved with technical efficiency. If we win that thesis claim, it means they can only ever reassert empire elsewhere, and the epistemic project of the 1AC misses the point of this whole new world order. In the framework, we meet all the turns case analysis, prove the plan is bad, and internal link turns all their advocacy skills offense because it proves their approach to IR is wrong, and the impact turns their research counterinterpretation. You should be an ethical academic responsible for evaluating the 1AC as a research project. That means if we win their interpretation, it incentivizes a desire to stabilize uncertainty. You should gut check neg to compensate for your own commitment to the cybernetic system. We have an argument that you're intrinsically biased towards those forms of representation, which means you should artificially gut check neg. You should consider the 1AC as a research project that occurs within a larger system of power. That's better for fairness because the plan is 10 seconds of an 8-minute speech. In that context, it's key to solving all of their clash offense. People on the right and left oppose arms cells by analyzing justifications is key to parsing out arguments. Our interp doesn't allow word picks, and it's not unpredictable to hold the F accountable to their descriptions of Africa. It's worse for fairness if they can shift their explanation of international actors to evade neg ground. At worst, the F gets objectivity good, which is better than anything they get against a counterplan or a disad. But their interpretation finalizes a desire to extract absolute certainty from the world to create their understanding of Africa is not neutral because knowledge is always informed by intent, which is the thesis claim that our bleaker evidence makes, which means if we win a link to their description of Africa are necessarily overcoded by a desire to maintain imperial power. This is how the politics of design, the desire for complete certainty, functions on the micro level through the artificial schematizing of political reality within pseudoscientific academic frames. Within pseudoscientific academic frames, like we have data from 2016 that says it, that hide a fidelity to Western statecraft and militarism and the supposed neutrality of debates over the plan, which means they create violent activists who believe their worldview is the cosmic truth of the universe because the data says so. Bleicher says that dogmatism is the operative attitude of cybernetic intervention, whereby colonialism takes the form of tech development, oil extraction, and ethnic cleansing under the guise of imposing democratic truth onto the world, which means they force debaters and judges to collude in that project and mastery, which is offense on the level of framework and fiat. All of their arguments about how we have to, about evidence precision and the specificity, you should understand as the precise myopia that seeks to create a new political project outside of history. The notion that all examples have to be about AFRICOM, every card we read has to be directly about the plan, is the rush towards conservative shutdown that understands the world as that understands conflict in Africa as isolated, a singular event. Our whole point is that it's a result of a larger epistemological structure and a desire for certainty, which the 1AC only reinforces. The data arguments there, it produces global genocide. Chow and Six under the agency of fact authoring the production and knowledge became the institutional substantiate the militaristic concept of the world as target activities, the language and anthropology of only tribe and ideology, the disciplining and development of information are part and parcel of what is strategic logic to surprise that is doomed to fail, can not be derived from the war, put an end to violence long as knowledge produced in the main of the circuit of target ultimately consolidates omnipresent in the United States, while other have no choice but to remain in target to justify destruction. Society will ultimately confirm the virtual world that was unleashed by bombs. The other culture getaways, target fields, area studies been haunted by the problem of the vanishing object. If they win that data is good, it's not intrinsically offense against our argument, because we haven't said that information is bad, but rather that the deployment of information through myopic gestures like the 2AC's conservative shutdown strategies is depoliticizing and defangs radical movements and often becomes a means of further imperialism. The public IR knowledge argument, they have no description for how they access this or the internal link between that and movements, which means you should have a low threshold. But if we win an epistemology argument, it means they make movements that are necessarily opposed to change and that are necessarily opposed to change. The rec card is going to be answered in the 1AR, but it has actually no. I'm going to answer that. It says nothing, but we haven't said that pragmatism is bad. Bunny's going to talk about pragmatism a bunch in the 1AR. The prerequisite argument, Friedman doesn't say that they're a prerequisite or that they actually cause demilitarization. It just says that AFRICOM should be reduced. We can hypothetically agree with that without agreeing that the way the 1AC has done that is good. They group all of these arguments about the F restricting colonialism and that being a link term. The 2AC will say that the 1AC is 2AR will say that the 1AC is a simple singular project, which you should understand is a failure of thought that invests in the Western fantasy of deregulation. Control no longer operates through the forward deployment and training operations, but through digitalized distance from the victims of imperialism. And a Pentagon control center is meant to predict and preempt hotspots, like the DoD's financing of a digital map of Africa that locates hotspots for things like disease and climate change to be targeted and resolved in advance with technical efficiency. The 1AC finalizes its remote control by presenting itself as a velvet glove for the infinite shift of militarism. They never answered any of the shift arguments. You should protect the block, because the 1AR will make a bunch of new arguments, and all of this is grounded in our evidence. First, we have a few impacts. First is stress testing. This is a Hartman evidence. The technical management of Africa is a series of hotspots, provides a target for free American stress testing to vet the institutional strength of allied countries. The outcome will be surveillance, borders, and detention, and private policing to stabilize states that are friendly, i.e. to fortify countries around Somalia for the sake of maintaining stability. Two is that countries shift to European PMCs, which are more dangerous. Use in 12, there are personal plan for more 2,000 European military personnel to be filed higher to governments continue to hire to simply give their national military security guards will undoubtedly increase naval deployments, increase life by those who corporation best connected with the establishment of stable play mercenaries have jumped out of the commercial opportunity. The government is chosen to try and legalize the use of private armed guards, allowing armed guards unshipped to escalate bonds, and the main encourage arms rates with pride. 3 is CIA Black Ops, Mazzetti, and 14, the CIA remains in charge after a troop left. The CIA is running a program to arm and train rebels. Some might want to get the CIA out of the killing business, but that's not happening anytime soon. 4 will shift to drone warfare to expand the region. Reductions are toothless. Alfred, in 16, the drone base was closed. It doesn't mean the U.S. or drone wars within the U.S. has a wide record of bases across Africa, at least 60 bases, with the U.S. has shifted drones from the Horn. This does not mean trucks are going to stop. The other threats are forcing redistribution of American resources. Obama announced set up a base in Cameroon. The U.S. was also looking for a new drone base in North Africa. The shuffling of drones shows how totally integrated drones are in militarism. Only intervening on the level of epistemology can solve. You should construct what Hartman refers to as an anti-politic machine and understand all of these shifts as the result of a colonial legacy of fluid empire, which produced the conditions for Somalian instability in the first place, proven by the fact that 15 years ago, I guess 25 years ago, Clinton actively supported the Somali regime, which means we need to rethink state motives, power dynamics in Africa, and understand the way these conflicts are regurgitated and reproduced because of the necessity of threats to maintain the liberal system in order to resolve the 1AC. All of those things are also DAs or are also defense to the AF that prove it gets inevitably circumvented absent an intervention on the level of epistemology. Skip the permutation there. Hartman indite is toothless, doesn't say anything. It just says that it's wrong about history. I've contextualized this evidence to the AF, so it doesn't matter. The Matthews evidence is going to be answered by all of the tech stuff in the 1AR. They have not. All the rest of this is going to be in the 1AC or in the 1NR. But the broad thesis that the 2AC has missed that makes this debate unwinnable is that power no longer operates through horizontal cooperation, but instead operates through the convergence on Africa through things like transnational corporations and deregulated finance. All of these things means that the plan's attempt to deregulate, move out, remove forward deployment can only ever infinitely shift empire.
Okay. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. So you say that using our deployment of data is necessarily bad, but you don't say information is bad. So how should we use information in order for it to not be problematic?
Our argument is that as long as information remains a way of sort of finding certainty, of trying to find the singular myopic solutions that the 1AC endorses, it inevitably becomes redeployed as a part of sort of as a project of imposing objectivity.
Right. So, okay, sure. So
that
how
doesn't
should
mean that like numbers and percentages or whatever are
okay,
like
how should we solve problems?
Violent. Huh?
How should we solve problems?
Well, we've presented a paradigm for understanding conflict in Africa, if that's what you're
How do we resolve
but also like
conflict?
We would problematize the notion that there is no other way to solve conflict than with data.
Okay,
because,
sure.
like,
So
that
okay.
just isn't true.
Okay, so how do we solve conflict?
This question that is like, all right, all conflict. Boom,
Okay, so you
solve
can't
it.
solve
You all
conflict. You can't even try to attempt to solve it.
The
So
notion
any
that there is-
attempt to make things better is problematic, is what you're saying.
No, that is the opposite of what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm impact turning the notion that anyone could ever answer the question, quote, how do you solve conflict? That makes no sense. Every conflict is unique. All of these things are intertwined in incredibly complex power structures and dynamics.
Okay, sure. So how does an Afropolitan computational aesthetic resolve that?
So Bunny's going to talk about this a lot in the 1AR, but it creates a new means of understanding politics in a material level and also in an epistemic level towards embracing the sort of contingency of all of these things.
Okay.
The importance of analyzing them, as unique events.
Okay, so.
But situating them within these longer genealogies of militarism that I spent a bunch of times explaining.
Okay, sure. So how do we embrace your alt?
How do we embrace the alt?
Like, how is it used to resolve your impact? Like, how can it resolve your impact?
So, like, in which way? On this sort of like epistemology side or on the more material side?
The epistemology side.
So, like, the top level epistemology thesis is that all of this stuff is because of a desire for certainty. The alternative begins from uncertainty and says that that is.
Okay, so are you saying like proposing? Okay, so your link is proposing an idea that we say can solve things is bad.
No, that is not my link.
Okay, I mean that's what it sounds like.
I'm sorry that it sounds that way. I mean, like,
okay.
I read a bunch of cards about AFRICOM and the shift that'll take place post-plan. I mean, I think that is more than just solving problems is bad.
I sent the cards.
Quick thing before the 1R starts. Nick, did I miss something? Or I think that all the shift cards weren't in your 2NC doc.
Yeah, PMCs and then the other card.
Nice.
That's an issue. Okay, yes.
Oh, thanks for asking. I forgot.
Okay. Is it cool if I send him in the body?
No.
Okay, I sent him. Sorry about that, everybody.
Bunny, we're good for an order.
Yeah, 1 sec. I'm just gonna either one. Sorry for that horrible.
It was my fault. Yeah. So the order's the Nick, you gotta plug in that. The order's the permutation and then the alternative, and like the bottom of the 2AC line by line, that's all about the permutation. Did everyone
say that one more time?
Yeah. The permutation and then the alternative and like the bottom of the 2AC line by line, that's all about the alternative. Good, everyone? Awesome. Oh, wait, yeah, we're good. Okay. We impact her in the case you don't get a permutation, the double its severance spikes out of the research model and rhetorical strategy of the 1AC, which is a vote for intellectual irresponsibility and proves that the permutation is a negative argument. All links or dissents refuse the colonial picture that establishes the peace and integrity of the low-level genocidal violence at home against a carefully curated image of the racialized colonial other devoid of discipline, order, and rule of law. Africa isn't neutrally framed in IR. The discipline uses the mirage of empirical research to provide an alibi for military presence, resource extraction, and arms sales that produces the conditions for failed states and terror in the first place. Be skeptical of their apocalyptic account of regional instability. No great power would risk nuclear war over Africa, proven by increasing Russian and Chinese investment in the region. They aren't going to vaporize each other over a resource that they all want, and the entire region has stabilized over time. No risk of African wars or drawn Burbeck. 16 Africa has presented a war with incumbent, but this is outdated. The amount of warfare in Africa is declining dramatically, and most Africans are more secure than ever. Africa called for a war too linked to Western minds over the last 17 years. Many Africa worsted, and WHO shows a 95 decline in African conditions. The world has become less willing to sell arms over that few conflicts over into political precision. It may say less likely improvements are reinforcing each other. The nation of Africa work together through the institution of African Union to help deploy peacekeepers. If we win our epistemology arguments, the F can only recapitulate fluid empire, which means the perm always fails. We have a couple of scenarios. The first is the shift is set from the 2 and C, but additionally, CIA block after the new AFRICOM as 8014. The CIA remains in charge of the troops. The CIA is running where they remain turn some might the CIA out of the killing business, but that's not happening anytime soon. Military presence is a permanent feature of the American political imperial project in Africa. Removing one arcane instance of arms sales is a useless cut against the rapidly evolving and continuous nature of American techno-militarism. Only we have empirical evidence on what happens when American forces are removed from Africa. We immediately shift to the operational support we already used to help AFRICOM, but don't sell, like ships in the Bay, regional ops, CIA military campaigns, secret prisons, helicopter attacks, and commando raids, which are all examples from our God and evidence from the 1 and C that Nixon in the body of the email that they dropped. The shift jurisdiction to the CIA, which takes over the program under cloak and dagger, means it makes imperialism more insidious by blurring the lines between war and peace and shifting it to black budgets, which removes oversight for human rights, makes presence more violent, and removes accountability for the military. The alternative. You should vote negative for a new computational aesthetic that dwells in the gap between language and reality in order to imagine new paradigms of world making. Only voting negative to disrupt the 1AC's fantasy of neutral observer over the international arena can reground techniques in our local milieu and sabotage the cybernetic move towards complete connectivity through engaging in a diverse array of non-sovereign activist tactics that capitalizing on the hubris of technological capitalism through hacking, shortages, and blockades. It's incommensurable with the affirmative. Our evidence does impact calculus. Mimetic representation acts like the Midas touch, infecting everything it comes into contact with and concealing alternative viewpoints or narcissistic faith in representation. And 23 graphs are only denying your own faith in representation and taking the leap of faith towards a computational aesthetic can solve. That means you should read their feasibility arguments as a false choice that narrows the moral arbiter of what debate can be and forces a double standard that ethically normalizes Trump while dismissing alternative forms of resistance. You have an intrinsic bias towards mimesis, which means you should err negative on all of their solvency presses because only refusing to think through representation can open up new solution to the app. That means we can do the app absent their description. Their world getting better arguments. The Matthews card says that people are smoking less and getting taller on average, with obviously isn't responsive to our argument, but this misses a point. All of the metrics that are good and bad established according to a false standard of objectivity that operates by quantifying life into how many cigarettes Americans smoke on average. It's myopic and ignores the infinite complexity of life, which the 2 and C explain. The first analytic argument about why the alt fails doesn't make any sense and assumes that accuracy should be the endpoint of politics, which we impact turn utopian fiat. Fuck fiat. I don't know. We don't do that. Floating pics. Cross-text was clear that it wasn't a floating pic. A-spec. No, we don't have to. There's no impact to it. Cross-text checks any vagueness, and all of our framework offense and defense arguments also apply. The GAT card is woefully generic and should be rejected because they never contested our theory in any way. So the claim that it can't explain anything is warrantless conservative shutdown. And it's about the the GAT card is also just about the root cause of war, which isn't about AFRICOM. So under their model, it shouldn't matter. The Norris card, wow, it's about Baudrillard and hyperreality and isn't responsive to the alternative. The Owen and Condit cards, our framework epistemology arguments prove that action absent ideological considerations can only ever recapitulate the impacts we criticize, which was why the alt is a necessary prerequisite. But these cards beg the question of debate's relationship to pragmatism and political solutions, which we're way ahead of on the framework debate. Unspecific rejection of alternative political action absent warranted analysis of why our specific theory is bad is a form of conservative shutdown that artificially cordons off other ways of relating to politics unwarrantedly, which is a bad thing. The singularity arguments, it's a way. The alt solves it. It's obviously conspiracy theory. The alt doesn't destroy innovation. The point of the alternative is that it uses technology positively, which is our thesis about tech versus technical systems and changing our relationship to technology, not just that actual physical objects are evil.
We have 7 minutes. We'll start.
We're having tech issues.
I have to rejoin the meeting, if that's okay, but the camera will still be connected, so nothing sus. Oh, it's because the Ethernet cable unplugged.
No. There you go.
How much AF prep was left?
3 minutes.
All right. Can y'all hear me?
Affirmative.
All right.
Yeah.
Sweet. There are no new cards, but the order is
That
going
was
to
a
be.
hiccup. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Okay. So the order is going to be the case page, and then the K overview, the straight down Nix 2 and C. Or actually, like most of the framework stuff, and then I'll move to the perm, but I will signpost, I promise, when I move to the perm. Okay. All right. And then links. Okay. Is anyone not ready? Okay, sweet. On the case page, it's impossible for them to win when they have not disproven any of our descriptions of the status quo. All of our evidence uses data and specifically cites that data is the most precise thing. All they're saying is that it's not true without providing counter data nor accurate descriptions of the status quo, which kind of necessarily impact towards all of their offense because it proves that their lack of data means that we aren't ever able to solve things more broadly. The 1AC has proven that just decreasing military through the Feldstein evidence would be able to resolve some form of instability. We're not saying that's solving all structural violence in Somalia, but they have conceded that we would be able to reduce the amount of deaths statistically through the studies that have been done correlating training to the negative things that would happen, which frames the entirety of the debate, the critique. The overview cannot, all of the impacts that they've listed cannot happen. They have mishandled the singularity turn. That's the moment when AI has overcome human intelligence. It's mathematically infinitely more likely that that would happen. And they have made the claim that as per 1AC cross-checks, then they're all card that we are moving towards being intertwined with tech inevitably. But our evidence says that that's as a result of how we have interpretation with the technology in the status quo, which they change, which means that this argument proves that the intertwining between tech and humans is good because of a world of a singularity phases out inequality, and advanced technology is still able to solve all of the impacts they isolated. That's the Kerman and Kissel evidence, which none of it was answered. Eliminating instability is not our claim. We are saying that we definitely decrease instability, but not that we have proven absolute certainty that we have proven that training is the root cause of all violence in the rest of Africa. We don't perfect any paradigm, but rather we're not encompassing with any geopolitical landscape that exists in the status quo, but rather we have proven that there is evidence that proves we're able to resolve it. The framework debate, way extend our interpretation. The 1EC should be evaluated as an isolated artifact. That's the key to clash. Anything else shifts the locus. A point for engagement, which undermines critical thinking and analysis, which is key to problem solving. The net creates an echo chamber without realizing the possibility of solvency spilling out of debate. If we win, data is good. Vote AB because we've won. That our evaluations of the wrong is true and the round is true and theirs aren't. The first argument, they don't internal link turn advocacy. If we prove that deployment of data is good. Second, they conceded both the wall piece of evidence, which I'll get to later. But it necessarily proves that only policy options is good because it gives us the ability to learn information about changing those things. And concession of the wretch evidence, which says that they don't engage institutionally, means that they'll never able to solve because discussions of academia have to overlap with things such as institutional engagement, or else we're never able to solve it. It's a terminal solvency deficit to the alternative. They can't say that our interpretation of IR is wrong when they have not posited theory IR and they haven't said anything that implicates the solvency of the 1EC. Evaluating the 1EC as a research project is bad because there's no explanation of what that means, and it links to our evidence because you could criticize anything outside the implementation of the 1EC. Even if the plan is 10 seconds of the 1EC, we have 7 minutes and 50 of why the actions of the plan are good, and they throw that out of the window. Word picks are bad regardless. It's not off ground and it isn't prepared to go against it because the theory checks. Their descriptions of Africa are bad and untrue, which turns all their offense because it proves that a lack of data allows Ivory Tower to move in and try to make a claim about resolving structural issues while ignoring policy issues that clearly are able to solve some form of the issue, but they have no evidence that substantiates anything they say. They have not said one thing about the process of the plan not being able to resolve violence, and we are not absolute certainty. We criticize that. We say that we have provided more accurate info to resolve some level of violence, not that
it is the end all be all for solving violence in Somalia, but just resolving things is good, which is the FLUC evidence that says that we can make causal claims between one or two things, which means that we can verify our truth claim. They link to this absolute certainty argument because they are making claims of absolute certainty about how the AF plays out, which obviously is a double short to their theory. Knowledge informed by intent is in the status quo, but not our intent, because they can see that fiat solves. We end up having sales to all of Africa, which means that they can't say that the violence increases post-plan. They're just calling us pseudoscience. It's the status quo where Trump just calls the coronavirus a hoax. The impact is endless deaths due to ignorance, which is what the what it ultimately is. The judge has no bias nor collusion. You should err negative on evidence dealing with specific data that they have not disproven. No implication of fiat. They've conceded that we get to the A way the AF, and concession of wretch means that the alt they can't solve, which I did above. I'm gonna go to the shift stat stuff right now, just so I don't drop it. Their child evidence doesn't say that data has to be violence, just that no, the PMC is no impact uniqueness. Their evidence in the context of PMCs existing. It doesn't say that there will be any escalation or that they will fill in or that it access our internal link. And they've conceded that local governments are able to fill in and solve, which prevents this PMCs. The CIA evidence says that they are running a program in Middle Eastern countries and does not speak to instability. That the CIA is all short-term programs for specific missions, while Africa has been there for a decade. And their drone card says that closing a drone based in Ethiopia means that the U.S. will still use drones elsewhere. It's not prescribed any action that would happen post-plan or internal links for Africa training. And the 2NR cannot do anything to win the debate because they conceded that the world is getting better. Their answer was ridiculous. It reverses the entire theory of power that the form of geopolitics that the U.S. is moving towards right now is bad because we're clearly amidst it, and it is improving quality of life. They've conceded that there's negativity bias against the progress the world has done. So air AF, and we have 23 charts that talk about core structural issues, which means that even if it says cigarettes, it also cites things like poverty and life expectancy, which are definitely more important. The permutation, extend permutation, do both. Yes, we get a permutation, though all these arguments are ridiculous. The permutation is not a neg argument. It tests the competition of the alternative. If we prove that there is no, that if we impact turn all of their links and prove that there's no link between their evidence and ours, then they aren't able to solve. And Africa is neutrally framed in the status quo, but not by the plan. And we haven't made any nuclear war impact, so that impact defense doesn't apply. The Hartman evidence is wrong because we read Meyer evidence that says that all of it is training, not healthcare and things that they've isolated.
I'm unclear. Oh, 723. Okay.
All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. Oh, I don't know if y'all are still prepping or not.
I think they're done.
Is that working now? Can you all hear me? Yep. Okay, cool. Is everyone good for an order? Okay. I'm just going to do the case straight down, starting on framework. Okay. Anyone not ready? The 1AC has missed the point. Cybernetics is a system that seeks global interconnectivity through transnational corporations and the artificial extension and privatization of sovereignty as a means of remotely controlling the world and eliminating uncertainty. The 1AC's faith in data, Sherry's insistence that I explain how to resolve every conflict ever, Kareem's rant about how we don't have any data for our argument, so it can't possibly be right, their desire for a clearly blueprinted alternative, and the defense of objectivity in their evidence are all part of a cybernetic fantasy of complete order, which functions through aesthetically redisclosing places like Africa as pure numbers and then artificially coordinating off alternative descriptions by saying things like, yeah, but where's the data? The fact that the 2AC says we should get to impact turn epistemology proves that your decision should not replicate that process through a singular myopia and instead refuse to weigh the F unless they win that their epistemology is good. If we win that thesis claim, it means the permutation is incoherent because it's an all or nothing question about aesthetic orientations toward the world. The frame for all of this is that they have no piece of evidence contesting our theory of power or the thesis that aesthetic orientation toward the world necessarily mediate our relationship to politics because they determine how we interpolate and interact with our given surrounding milieu. All of these things are structuring claims that I emphasized in the 2NC that Kareem doesn't come to grips with in the 1AR. And it means none of their ivory tower or activism arguments matter because it filters the ability for them to access any subject formation offense, and it makes it structurally impossible to think outside of a given aesthetic because it's all or nothing, which means the perm is incoherent on the level of framework and fiat and proves that you should intervene on the level of subject formation as the only way to resolve any of this offense. The counter interpretation is that the judge should be an ethical academic responsible for evaluating the 1AC as a research project. They've conceded that that is necessary for all of their skills and advocacy skills arguments because analyzing justifications for the AF is necessary to actualize political solutions, i.e. people on the right and the left supported AFRICOM initially, but they had different justifications for it, and only understanding the 1AC as a research project that occurs within a larger system of power can access any of that. All of the myopia stuff I'm going for proves that you should understand the 1AC as embedded within all of these broader structures that we have described, because anything else reconnects a colonial, or anything else recreates a colonial fantasy of deregulation that all of our evidence has impact turns. I'm gonna go back up to the singularity argument. None of your evidence speaks to status quo interpretations of technology. It's like 12 years old. There's no explanation for how it solves our impacts or why it doesn't solve. But Bunny did a good job explaining why the alternative reorients our relationship towards technology away from the drive towards complete interconnectivity, which makes things like accidents and overdrive inevitable, and which means only the alternative can resolve it. We haven't said that technology is bad or that we destroy capitalism, which means there's functionally no link to any of this bullshit. The shift stuff proper. Kareem has a bunch of short answers to our cards, but none of them come to grips with the broader thesis claim that the Hartman evidence is getting at, which is that only evaluating the function of fluid empire on Africa is a genealogical process, something that takes place over and over again because of a certain epistemic relationship to uncertainty can create a positive relationship towards Africa that doesn't seek the reshifting of militarism. They have conceded so many warrants for circumvention and the way that militarism is redeployed to prop up regimes. First is all of the offshoring stuff that Bunny explained very clearly in the 1AR. Second is the PMC stuff. Their only answer is that there's
there's no evidence that they want to fill in. Our evidence says that they're looking for new markets now, and that the reductions in the presence by the United States uniquely creates an avenue for them to enter into the global system. All of that means, first of all, that they recreate colonial logics of domination, and that they can't solve any of their structural violence impacts, because all of their evidence says that those things come about as a result of the violent institutions. The PMC's card does have an impact claim in it, and it says they're worse than the American military because they're less regulated, which proves our thesis claim about the sort of new era of warfare and the way that it functions. Only the alternative can solve. You should vote negative to interrupt the desire for certainty on the level of value itself. The cybernetic drive for connectivity is driven by a fearful hatred of chaos and a fetishistic attempt to eradicate difference. Only beginning politics from that difference with a new aesthetic can complicate the project on the individual and institutional level. You should not conform debate to sweeping narrative and pseudoscientific IR theory, and instead create an ethical injunction towards the embrace of unpredictability and flux as the inevitable foundation of politics. They dropped it, so you shouldn't make me reinvent the wheel. All I have to do is beat the permutation now. The 1 AR was too light on the perm, and all of the turns case shift stuff proves that there's no net benefit to it. You should filter it through framework, because epistemology determines the ability to actualize any of our politics. Africa isn't neutrally framed in IR, but the result of a carefully curated image of a colonial other devoid of order. They conceded escalation is unlikely because, yeah, I don't need any of that. It severs the case. Filter it through framework.
3 minutes.
Okay. The order is going to be the AF. And then, okay. Okay. Is anyone not ready? Okay, cool. Vote affirmative to substantially reduce training missions through AFRICOM that helps solve Somali instability with risk escalation in an unstable country into generational conflict that can kill thousands every single year. Also reduces instability in the Sahel, which kills thousands, has escalated violence in militant groups every single year. Those are the only impacts that has any risk of solvency and doesn't depend on an out-of-context philosophical speculation. There is two big picture reasons to vote AF. The first is that data is good. We're the only team with contextual rigorous studies with specific information with the best forms of data analysis available and empirics. That's key to any probability of solvency because we have the most rigorous research possible and it's the only way to test correlations because truth is on a sliding scale. The more precise research outweighs. There's a huge framing issue is that they have read reasons as to why data is bad sometimes, and we have read reasons as to why data is good sometimes, but we have also read an app that meets the standards that explains why data is good, which means that there's functionally no link to their K, but it also means that the app is good and you should vote on that alone. But also, if you can't explain cohesively what the alt does based on the to and on, then you can't vote negative because even if Nick sounds good in the abstract, there's no way for the solvency for the alternative to be more so than the solvency of the affirmative. You should frame this as the probability of solvency because they have not contested that specifically decreasing AFRICOM is good to at least reduce instability in Africa. Onto the K, extend our interpretation. The 1AC should be evaluated as an isolated artifact. This means that they can only generate offerings from the epistemology and action, not external structures or representation. If we win framework, then that's the reason we win the debate because they've conceded a lot of our offense here. You should weigh the app versus something explicitly that they say about the affirmative because there are infinite things that they could critique about the 1AC that aren't about the action or the epistemology of the plan. They could, or anything about the 1A. You should hold them to a threshold where it has to be about the way that we defend the app, not the way that they say we defend it. Otherwise, it makes contestation impossible. That means that fiat is good because it's key to understanding idea testing in both epistemology and pragmatic effects of what actually occurs via the plan. That means that they don't get access to any fairness claim, and those outweigh because that's key to making sure that idea testing is held to a standard by which we could actually learn something from debate. Their model of debate skirts clash. That's proven by how they haven't gone to the case debate in the entire debate. That means that our model of debate is still net better for idea testing and for information and for education because we include both specific critiques and apps, but they unnecessarily exclude out apps that are key for us to solve. Their counter interpretation is arbitrary and self-serving, which means that you should default to ours because it is the most fair way for us to view the debate.
There's no interpret of what research is.
And there's no interpretation of what good research is, which means that you should still air off on this question. There's a big problem coming out of 2 and R's that they conceded that the world is getting better. This disproves all of their thesis and top-level claims that they said that we have conceded because they have dropped that poverty has decreased and life expectancy is going up and the teen pregnancy has been actively decreasing. All of these data collection processes are the way by which we are able to determine that determine the causality of these impacts and show that they are decreasing. This means that it is good. This means that the AF's epistemology is good and the neg is empirically wrong because they are just disproven by the existence of how all these things work. That means that their theory of power is wrong. It means that it should be really easy for you to vote on an AF ballot, especially because we should be able to weigh the AF. They've also considered that they link to their own offense because they're saying with certainty how the AF functions. We are not saying that. We are saying that we don't think that the AF is a silver bullet, but that it is net better for Africa. It is net better for Africa, even if it's not necessarily the root cause of all conflict in the entire world. A lot of conflict is still being resolved by that, which means that they link to their own offense as much as the AF does. And you know that the AF is still good, which means that you should go AF on presumption, and you should hold the line for the 2 and R's answer to our singularity term because this was conceded in the block. The extension was based on the mishaps. They said that the singularity was inevitable, which proves that on the long run, all the impact we've isolated that happens in the basis of inequality and technological developments can face because AI surpassment of human brain activity actively faces out all intention of competition. They have literally isolated that a world of peace is inevitable in the long run, but it turns all their impacts about how they are shifting from the way tech is designed in the status quo because of our evidence says that driver technology in the status quo is what helps us reach the singularity. If the singularity effectively faces out any competitive incentive, then the driver dominating over technology is effectively meaningless over competition. I'll answer the shift is that here. It's a non-starter when they don't answer any of our arguments against it. First, they consider that our 1AC evidence says that local leaders are able to resolve that, and our specific data analysis is about AFRICOM training, which means that they're all concepts don't apply. Their PMC evidence is not in the context of AFRICOM, not even Africa, and there's no terminal impact to it. Nick described it as an internal link. Second, they have considered imperfect but specific analysis is better than none at all, which is the 1AC burrito evidence. It's key for all better solutions. That fiat means that we end all FMS sales so that they can't go to different countries. Third, there's not enough of a description of what this looks like or implicates for you to be comfortable voting on it. The FS consistently said that they've considered that training has data correlated with instability, so we're able to resolve that. They've also considered that Wretch evidence, which says that there's no spillover of the alternative, which means that it is impossible to solve, especially when their theory of power links back to themselves in the terms of certainty. That means that only the act or the perm is able to resolve any of their office because it allows institutional engagement, which means that it is key to resolve any conflict. If we win the theory that data is good and that the world is getting better, even though we are increasingly technologically driven, then that means that it is a reason you vote AF because none of their offense applies to the affirmative or the way that we conceptualize how we use data. The wretch is a solvency deficit to the alt because it proves that it can never spill out because K debate becomes an echo chamber within itself, and there's no possibility of change, which means that it's necessarily nihilist, and the alts can't solve but the perm or the actors.
Good debate, Nick. I love you, and I love you too, Bunny.
I love you both. Have great debate.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, really fun. Oh, my timer.
Someone had to end my career. It's got to be Green Valley LS.
It's okay. If you end our career, you're the best camp partner, bro.
Aw.
Is somebody from CKM on?
Sorry, did someone say something?
Yeah, is somebody from CKM here?
No. I can.
Yeah,
I'll text them.
I can maybe just ask you. Do you know which of their cards are the PMC shift cards? Like all of them?
Yeah. So if you check in the body of the email.
Yeah, I see this modern Ghana.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, we totally didn't have our headphones in. Do you want us to send you some cards?
I just wanted to know which are all of the cards that make the PMC shift argument.
Okay.
I see this modern Ghana 12 card in the text of the email. Are there any others? I kind of think there are.
Yeah, there are. The countries will shift to you. It's the Hughes evidence that Nick sent, and then the CIA argument that Nick sent.
Sorry, it's hard to hear because Nick's computer is like playing after. I'll just have him send all of them in an email right now.
That would be great. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
I think that we're all in.
Hello.
Hello, is Nick there?
He's coming.
Okay. All right, Nick, let us know when you're good. You're good? Okay. Anyone not ready for me to announce the decision? All right. So this was a really great debate. Really enjoyed judging it. I'm sure that David and Jacob did too. The decision is a 3-0 for the negative from CK McClatchy. So I think I probably speak for all of us when I say that that is not reflective of the fact of like how close this debate was and like how good this debate was. So I can go first if that's good with the two of you. So I think that the neg is kind of a head on this controlling narrative about how the AF uses data and all of their analysis about how it redisposes people as numbers, and at best doesn't resolve violence in Africa, at worst leads to fill in by more insidious actors. My biggest problem is that I feel like the AF needs a defense of why their understanding of Africa is good. You have a defense of why like contingent understandings of knowledge are good, and also reasons why like there is violence that's going on in Africa. But I think a lot of your strategy hinges on the fact that it sort of seems like you're not acknowledging that they're reading evidence about Africa that seems to somewhat apply to the AF. So even though they aren't reading evidence that's specific to military training program, I think they are reading evidence about the way that we understand the US military in Africa. Their Hartman evidence says that when we try to understand Africa as vulnerable in an uncertain region, we then intervene more and control, invade with our military, which fits well for me with their fill-in arguments, because it means that even if we get rid of training programs, then it's still like a space that's right for private military contractors to take over. Framework debate doesn't really do much for me on either side. I think both teams agree that I can and should evaluate the epistemology of the 1AC. Permutation doesn't get developed or explained enough in the 2AR for me to vote on it. The world is getting better turn gives me like a long pause, because I think the neg doesn't really have a good answer to this. And if you win this argument, I'm thinking maybe it challenges like the neg's thesis of cybernetics and poses like serious uniqueness problems for the neg. In the 2AR, you say that it means that the neg's theory of power is wrong. I don't think it means though that you necessarily win that your data is good. And you, so then I ask myself, can you still be part of like this broader structure of colonial control? I think since they're going for a case turn and they have offense that's based off of your understanding of IR, that this doesn't mean that like I totally discount all of their data arguments. I already explained a lot of the data debate. The AF's arguments are that data is necessary to come up with contextualized empirical conclusions. It leads to more rigorous research, and truth is a sliding scale. I read the AF's 1AC cards that are a defense of their worldview and framework. I read Walt and Barrera and Williams and some other cards in your heuristic contention, which I think make persuasive arguments about how we should evaluate contextual arguments rather than generalities. The AF says the data is sometimes good and sometimes bad, which is a claim that I agree with, and I think ultimately both sides agree with, which leads me to think that it's a question of if the AF's data is good or bad. And I don't think there's a great defense of why the AF uses, the way that the AF uses data is good. The PMC shift argument, I think that the AF, I agree with the AF that a lot of the negs cards are about the status quo and say that the CIA, drones, PMCs are taking over control of Africa and engaging in secret warfare. If that's true, I don't know why the AF's impacts aren't inevitable, but the AF says that local leaders are able to resolve it. But I think the neg is saying that this type of warfare is more insidious and has a risk of increasing, and that these programs are looking for new avenues. So I think leaders won't be able to stop it, and that they will maybe increase and will likely increase instability. The singularity turn, your Kurzweil evidence that the AF read says that we need to repeal capitalism to prevent the technological development needed for singularity. I think that the neg, I don't think that the neg does that, and that it's not unique offense for the AF, since your evidence says that it's like basically inevitably going to happen. I think that the neg should have like a clearer external impact, and that like a lot of this debate just gets like so messy and hard to resolve, because it's just like both teams, like two ships passing in the night, being like, data should be like contextual and we should like understand truth as a sliding scale, and the neg being like, well, like your understanding of Africa is bad because of like colonial control, and then the AF being like, well, we should be contextual, and then like it's just really hard to resolve that. So I think like having sort of a clear external impact for the neg, and for the AF just having more defenses of like why like the way that you have understood the world like in your first contention is good, would be helpful for me.
I can go next. I'm super similar, so I don't really have too much to add. On a broad level, I don't really think the AF has a super specific answer to the neg's theory of power. And although that itself is not damning, kind of on a technical level, the neg ends up winning a little bit of offense on the link debate, which is kind of framed as like a solvency takeout to the AF. I really want to reiterate what Emily said about like two ships passing in the night. This debate would have been a lot easier to decide, I think, if there was a little more direct clash. Basically, like as early as the 2AC and the 2NC, you were both accusing each other of like completely not engaging with the other side, which is a little bit of a weird look, especially that early in the debate. But yeah, I basically agree that there was kind of like a tie on the framework debate. I'm going to weigh the AF kind of versus the alt. I wish the neg had done a lot more link debating that was in the 2NC to get into the 2NR. Some of this like Chow, Bleicher, colonial imaginary type link arguments would be helpful for you here in case you don't win some of this PMC stuff. I think, I guess like the short of my decision is like I vote neg on the PMC disad basically outweighs and turns the AF. I think the European PMC's card is pretty good in terms of making like both the reverse causal argument that they want that says that PMCs will kind of jump on a financial opportunity, as well as like, I think your Friedman evidence, your AF solvency evidence just like isn't quite as good as you're giving it credit for, especially in the fact, well, it's not that the evidence itself is not good, but that it says that military presence, like US large scale military presence, is kind of an alt cause to the AF's internal links. And they read a bunch of cards that says the US will inevitably have like Navy ships all over Africa and like this huge drone base in Italy or whatever it is. So like your own solvency evidence is kind of spotting them, the solvency takeout they're going for. And then I think they win a little bit of like net offense on maybe PMCs are worse, more nefarious, harder to regulate and stuff like that. Yeah, the biggest problems for the AF strategically are like the just lack of time allocation and maybe a bit of a 1AR, 2AR disconnect on the perm debate and the alt debate. I think for me, the 1AR really doesn't get to the alt debate very much at all. And in terms of the perm, like it's just like it's not explained enough in the 2AR. It's just a bit vague on how it incorporates both. Like this is certainly, I agree, the right push for the perm. You want to go for this in the debate, that the AF is kind of a first step and we can incorporate their theory of power and do the AF as well, but you're just a little too vague on that. It was kind of at the end of the time. And yes, like the world getting better argument, I agree with what Emily said. And I also thought it was confusing. I want to add that like it confused me that you all were making these arguments as well as your like strong specificity push. Like if the neg had just been like, I don't know why we care about this if we're just only caring about Africa, like what happens about AFRICOM in these specific regions. I'm not really sure how much this gets you. I get that you're saying that it takes out their theory of power, but like you're framing that as a specific question. And they kind of have an indite of it too. The only other thing, like the singularity turn, I think you need to address that the alt solves it. I wasn't ever really sure what the utility of it was other than like an alt cause to like alt's impacts are inevitably going to be solved. But again, it like has the specificity problems that you all are trying to indicate is like, yeah, I'm not really sure what the utility of it is. And you need to address, there needs to be more of an alt press if you're going to get around that the alt solves it. That's about it.
I don't want to interrupt, just like in case I forget this question, but for like, I just have two questions real quick. So for the singularity turn, if it's like inevitable, and like even if the alt solves it, but like the argument is that like achieving the singularity like phases out like the impacts. Like why does that mean they have an external impact?
Yeah. Well, like first of all, I think when you say it and when you say the impacts, it needs to be much more described than just like that level of explanation in the debate. I think you need to just like use language that the neg is using, or at least like refer to the specific scenario about Africa that you all are saying is like super specifically important. But the bigger problem is that like they've said that that the alts can create a kind of relationship to technology that allows us to still like develop AI and, you know, get the positive benefits of like how it could solve inequality, but in a, you know, in a way that's more aligned with the alt. And although that's super vague, like the lack of 1AR coverage on what the alt does means I kind of don't really have a choice but to like accept their argument on that front.
And my second question, I guess, like applies to both of y'all. It's just like, why is the impact of instability in Somalia and Sahel, like, why didn't that apply as a reason that data is good? I understand that there's a disconnect, but like, I'm just asking, like, how could we alleviate that? Or like, I guess I'm just, yeah.
I guess I didn't really vote on data bad. I voted on the plan, like removing troops from Africa is bad, or removing training from Africa is bad because it causes PMC fill-in, which is worse. So I don't really think it's like a data thing. Maybe I'm not really understanding your question.
No, oh, sorry. I just thought you said like that you agreed with Emily. So I was just asking that for both of y'all, just if you had insight. It's really no.
Yeah, I guess for me on the data question, I agree with what Jacob said about like the external impact, like removing troops being bad. But also I think it connects to sort of what he was saying at the beginning of his decision about like having a more like robust answer to their theory of power and understanding the world, because if they win that the way that IR portrays and understands Africa is always through this like drive to portray it as uncertain and demand data in order to like better know it, which is I guess like somewhat separate from like the PMC fill-in debate, then I think that they win that like the way that you have portrayed Africa sort of fits in with that. So then the way that you answer that is by like contesting their sort of theory of cybernetics, data, control of the world, and having defenses of the way that like you've portrayed Africa. Because I think you have defenses of like having contextual understandings good and like having policy debates are good. And then I just like, I don't feel like there's that much of a defense of why your understanding of conflict in Africa and instability in Africa, I just don't feel like there's really a defense of that. So if you have like, I don't even really feel like the way that you like explain how you get to the data is defended.
I can toss in my thoughts because my decision came down a little bit more on this data front. I definitely agree with everything that Emily and Goldschlag have said so far about the PMC fill-in stuff, and I did also conclude negative on that part of the debate, but I also thought the negative was ahead on some framework stuff, primarily because I just think the affirmative interpretation that starts in the 1AC has some issues, because the like 1AC interpretation on framework is the 1AC should be evaluated as an isolated artifact. Negative can only weigh offense to the 1AC specific epistemology and action. I think that the negative has demonstrated that the specific epistemology of the 1AC is bad. I think that the reason I concluded that way is I think that the data good stuff doesn't end up serving enough as AF offense, because I think the negative argument is not purely data bad. I think that the negative argument is excessive reliance on data as the only mechanism by which we are able to resolve problems, including instability in Africa, is an epistemologically bankrupt and inaccurate view of the world. And I think that then the 2AR argument where you say like data can be good in sub instances is actually the negative argument, because the affirmatives like 1AC evidence, even though it is saying like truth operates on a sliding scale, is essentially saying that in order to be policy relevant, in order to be considered, in order to like be an accurate form of knowledge that should be considered, it has to be grounded in strong data. I think the negative has said like strong data can be okay in some instances, but that demand for strong data above all else then reproduces this like epistemologically bankrupt view in the context of Africa, because that is then what justifies what the Hartman evidence is talking about with this like perpetual mapping of the African continent that then means that we're having this drive for control. I think that there's, independent of that, there's just an epistemology argument about why you shouldn't invest yourself into that system. I think that the specific epistemology of the 1AC, like I'm trying to justify like, what does it mean to weigh the AF when the AF has also said that epistemology is a relevant consideration? And I think that I ultimately just think the epistemology of the AF is not a good one and not one that I should endorse, because it either means we exclude anything that's not dependent on data, or it just means that we end up reproducing colonial tropes because we presume that when we are withdrawing that everything is going to be happy. But instead, that I think it was an author that starts with a T, the one in our card that says like that reproduces a more insidious form of violence, I think is a separate DA based on epistemology that says that the specific epistemological investment of the AF produces a negative consequence by making it so we have the language that Nick was using of this like velvet glove disad, that essentially says that when we're able to pretend to ourselves that we have like reduced presence and therefore reduced instability, then means that that epistemological investment is a bad one, because then it allows for the PMC fill-in to happen later, which means that you have a separate argument that says you actually produce more neo-colonial tropes if you do this withdrawal and then pretend everything is okay, which means the epistemology of the AF is bad, and also then proves that the action of the AF is bad, because that epistemological investment then is the route by which PMCs or CIA black ops are able to take over the continent and end up reproducing more violence. So that was where my decision ended up coming down. I think that the epistemology, like conceding to some extent that the negative gets to say the epistemology of the AF is bad, puts you in a tough spot without the affirmative having an argument about why consequences need to matter more. I think if the AF had won that consequences of our epistemological orientation are the most important thing, and then uses that along with alt presses that Emily and Jacob alluded to earlier, puts you in a better spot. But when you just say, quote unquote, weigh the AF, but you've also made the argument from the 1AC that the negative can get arguments for why the epistemology of the AF is bad, I'm just left like kind of not knowing how to adjudicate what that means. And when both teams have agreed epistemology is a relevant consideration, I think if the negative wins a disad to the affirmative's epistemology, that's a sufficient win condition for them. Any other questions we can help with? Anything else?
I just, do you have one, Sherry? No. Okay, I just have one more. That decision made sense. This was more about the PMC's argument. So like, what about like the answers were ineffective? Like, is it just like, yeah, I'm just like confused. Like, what didn't we, or how should I phrase this better? Yeah, like how best could we have answered the PMC's argument that we didn't do, if that makes sense? Yeah.
I just like don't really think you have a card about it. Like none of the 1AC cards make the reverse causal claim about PMCs that you need. They have a card that does make a reverse causal claim. Like if they didn't have a card that makes a reverse causal claim, I think you're doing okay. But really it's just, I think it's an Ev thing. I don't know if other people disagree.
Yeah, I think that's part of it for me. So to me, like your main answers are leaders are going to be able to resolve it and it's inevitable. And I agree that their evidence does somewhat seem to say like this is already happening. So I think if you have evidence that says either like it's not going to happen in Africa, that these PMCs like they don't care about Africa, that there's no benefit to them for investing there, or if you just make those arguments, I think you just need some sort of defense to like why it's not going to happen. Because I don't know, I think even if they win, that it's, even if you say that it's inevitable and PMC's drones inevitably are going to fill in, then I don't know why that doesn't take out your like crisis, instability, uncertainty sort of arguments for the advantage and make that inevitable too. So I think you just need to win that like it's not going to happen, they're not going to fill in Africa. Like I assume that this happens in like policy debates that you have too, where people make these sort of shift arguments, and then you just need to win that like these PMCs aren't actually going to do anything.
I totally agree with everything that Emily and Goldschlag were just saying. I think that in this 1AR and 2AR, if you like don't have a card, you can still do comparison that says, here's why we are still able to solve a sufficient amount of the AF, even if they do win this PMC fill-in stuff. Because I mean, your 1AC is built around, here is our data of the exact numbers of people that are dying every year and the numbers of civilians. You can then do that explanation where you're like, look, they may win some risk that there will be a fill-in, but we have won that at least 3,000 people less will die every year. Sure, post-AF, instead of like 3,000 people dying per year, it's 2,000 people dying per year. That's still an amazing point of progress and proves why specificity should matter more in this context, which then I think would put you in a better spot against just like PMC fill-in equals your AF is bad. I think that I was a little bit less neg leaning than Emily and Jacob on some of the fill-in stuff, mostly because I was struggling to adjudicate if they're like, if the negative evidence does reach the level of terminal defense, or if they are able to prove that there will be more deaths. I think if you're just in the 2AR, you say like, we have evidence that says this amount of deaths are caused directly by training operations. You know, the plan solves those. Even if there may be fill-in in other ways, the negative is not shown it is worse than the plan, which means that worst case scenario, this is some defense, but it is not offense. And then explain like, go through their evidence and say, here is why this is not a good enough offensive warrant for them. And I think you can be in a better spot just saying like the line of, even if the AF isn't a silver bullet, if we're able to prevent 10 more people in Africa dying, that would be preferable than the fear that there would be this some weird insidious shift that could potentially produce more instability on the continent, because I'm not positive that's going to be happening.
The other thing I would throw in there is that I think you can like, I guess a specific example of that, use like, tell me a little bit more of a story about this local leaders are empowered argument. Like you just say that sentence a couple times, but if you tell me how they get empowered and especially how they would be able to like resist PMCs, like if they had more power to veto operations and you had evidence that said they didn't like PMCs or something like that, then I think you can tell a story even in the absence of a card that lets you push back against their kind of shift arguments. But I also think like the solvency cards, these Friedman cards, as I read them, and not that it really mattered for this decision, but they kind of allude to like, it seems like they're saying that the training operations are more of like an example of US imperialism, and that overall US military presence, you know, the Navy and all of the like stuff that the negs alt cause warrants are like, it seems like your cards probably agree with those. So I think I think telling a little bit of a story about the local leader stuff and getting like having a way to like make that work with the specific warrants they're going for would probably be enough.
Yeah, and just one more thing to add is that I feel like in a lot of these debates, like it's really easy for policy AF internal link change to just disappear. But I think kind of connecting to like what David was saying, I think like explaining a little bit more your internal link chain to like how you get from this military training program in Africa to like being able to resolve like X number of deaths or make violence less likely. Being able to explain like how that happens, I think would help so much, because like that internal link is just non-existent really in like the 1AR and 2AR and like really not much beyond the 1AC. But since this is an argument that's about like your case, if you're able to win that like your internal link chain is still true and you're able to like resolve some amount of material violence or still have that impact, then you exactly like Goldschlag and David were saying, like you have that to weigh against their turn.
Right. Thank you. Good luck, Nick. Good luck, Alice.
Thank you.
Bye. Everyone.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Yeah.
See y'all.
Bye. See ya.
Thank you. Good luck, y'all.